Hi, Andreas from Toddle here. Today I want to talk about releasing software, how to deploy and get your software in the hands of your users, because that process is a really important part of being a software developer. And the sort of standard, I think, the common best practice today is generally using something called a staging environment. But we actually here at Toddle are not a big fan of staging environments. We generally consider them to be bad practice. And so I want to dive a little bit into why that is, like what is a staging environment? Why do we consider staging environments to be a bad idea? And what do we do instead? There's nothing about this video really that's particularly Toddle related, but I'm going to show you some examples in Toddle to sort of highlight what I'm talking about, right? So let's start by talking about the general release procedure. And I'm going to break it down into sort of the very basics, right? So here I have the sort of most naive approach, really, which is you have like a bunch of developers, they're each working on their own feature, A, B, and C. And in this case, when one is done, they will push that to production, and then feature A will be live. In this case, when the next one is ready, B will be launched, and eventually, right, C. And every time you push, that feature goes live into production. Of course, each of these are working on their own branch. So like when B deploys, they're not going to override the stuff from A. It's going to be merged, right? But they're still pushing all their changes directly to production, right? Now, the benefit of this is that it's really fast and you get to deploy things really quickly. Like the time from you start working on something till it's live in the hand of the user is as short as possible, right? Which is great. The downside is, of course, that you have to make very sure everything works on your version before you publish it. And if you're building something more complex, like a larger part of the system, you have to build the whole thing on your branch before you can push it, right? Which is not great. So you end up with these very long-lived branches that you have to work on for a long time before you actually get them production. And as a general rule, if you want a very fluid, effective software process, getting short-lived branches is a big part of it. Make a lot of changes, a lot of small changes tends to be better than a few big changes. Right? So let's go and look at how people sort of solve this problem. Right? So the number one approach today, the most standard one, is introducing a staging server. And what that means is basically whenever you're making changes here, you're actually pushing those changes here, not directly to production, but you're pushing to a different environment or different server called a staging server, where these sort of changes can go and live before they move to production. So you get a chance to go and test them here and say, okay, well that actually works now, and now I want to go and like push all this to production, right? And then you go and push that to production, and then these move away, and maybe we hear now the C feature here can be pushed to the staging, and they can be tested until that eventually also moves over to production, right? So you create this little buffer in between, which is your staging server, where you can push to. And that means that you don't have to have like a single developer here working on a really, really big feature, because you can all push them to the staging server and sort of wait for that to be done before you push to production. Now, there are some problems with this. One of them is that you end up, first of all, slowing down the whole release procedure, because you now have to sort of wait and only push to production when everything here is ready. Right, so you get to push more stuff and have it less stuff just being just on one developer branch, but you still end up having this sort of bottleneck where everything have to come in, and so I have to wait for it to be all ready and tested and verified before we push it to production. Right. So in order to sort of try and solve this, it's very common to introduce what's called a pre-production server. And so the way that works is that you basically keep pushing to the staging server like you normally would, but then when you make a release, instead of making it directly to production, you go to this pre-production server first. And so the idea here is developers can push as much as they want to the staging server, but then every now and then, whenever there's a release cycle, they pull all those changes into a production server, a pre-production server. In this case, A and B was put in. This one, yeah. There's a pre-production server, and then We test and verify that everything works on pre-production, and then we push those things to production, right? It goes a little over here. This sort of makes it at least feel a lot more safe, because you don't have the problem of having to wait, which is the problem with the staging and so, right? If you're about to do a release, nobody can push to the staging environment, because at that time, their new changes would just basically go directly to production. Like if you push them immediately after it goes to production, the whole idea of the staging server is to have a buffer, right? So we kind of have to eventually, like, occasionally lock down the process, say, hey, nobody push right now because we're about to do a release, right? And that's not ideal. We want everybody to be able to deploy things when they're ready, so they can start working on the next thing, right? It'll slow us down not to have that. So the pre-production environment helps a bit here. We now have a staging server, means you don't have to freeze anything. We don't have to say, oh, you can't push right now. In practice, that still kind of happens a little bit, right? Because there's still times like, oh, this staging feature is not ready for pre-prod, so we don't want to get it out yet. So it still does happen, right? And now you have to do this big release orchestration, where everything has to be coordinated centrally in a way. We're saying, well, all these features we want all these features to be part of this next release, so therefore they have to be done now, and all these other things we can't work of them now because we don't want them on the staging server yet, right? Because whatever goes on the staging server eventually goes to pre-prod, right? So we're still back to this sort of centralized controls released train, if you will, and we still have a lot of the blocking problems of before, but it's a lot better. Now the biggest issue here is that the time it takes from a feature like this to go from, like in this case, Casper's machine, all the way through staging, pre-production, and to production can sometimes be really, really long. It is not that uncommon to see that the time from someone starts working on a relatively simple feature till it's live in production can be weeks or months, right? So we ended up with this like issue where like you just want to make a simple feature that improves the quality of experience for all your users, but the time it takes from building it to getting it live can take literally, like, it can feel like forever, right? The other problem is that this actually process that's intended to improve the quality of your software by catching bugs early and not having like untested features going into production, in reality statistically has the opposite effect. So there's a report that comes out called the State of DevOps. I'll link the most recent one in the description. And it basically goes and runs a bunch of questionnaires against a lot of top software companies to try and figure out what their process is and how those processes actually end up reflecting in things like software quality, time to market, like all sorts of different things, right? And consistently over the last many years, they found an extremely strong correlation between companies that are able to go from like development to production, which is called your cycle time, right? Companies with a short cycle time, meaning the time it takes from you start working on a feature till it is live to your users, almost consistently have a lower error rate and a lower bug rate than companies that have a longer cycle time. So adding all these interim steps actually doesn't help the quality of your software. It can hurt it, right? So what are we doing? And it also definitely doesn't improve the speed you deliver software. It hurts that quite a lot. And also generally just is a lot more of an annoying process to work with, right? Like generally nobody really enjoys the setup. So what can we do instead? Well, the solution is to actually go back to basics and saying, well, we want a scenario where people are deploying frequently and where they're deploying directly to production as often as possible, right? So the top software companies will deploy tens, if not hundreds of times a day, new features or changes directly to production, right? The question then is, how do we do that in a secure way, right? Because we know that there are times when things go live, or we still maybe want one or two other people to have a look at it before we entirely have it go live. There are also features that, are part of a bigger feature set, right? So at Toddle, we recently released a whole new version of our API panel, the tool that lets you connect to APIs. Now, that was the product of many, many, many features, many small changes that we've done. But we wanted to release it as one whole unit, not like half add something that didn't really work in context over and over again, right? So the way we do that is that we decouple the process of deploying software to our production environment from releasing features to our users. And we do this with something called feature flags. So a feature flag is a little switch here that says, should this feature actually be visible to our users or not? And by having this separation where our software basically say we can build features without showing them, means that we can now decouple and we can deploy as much as we like, as fast as we want, but only when we turn on a feature, our users actually get to see it, right? So we get the best of both worlds. We get to control what features get released to users and when, and we get to push and build software as fast as we can, right? Now, feature flags here are generally not one set. It's actually generally done per user. So we'll just add a user here. And so what it'll actually look like is that you'll probably have a whole different set here where maybe feature A is turned on. There we go. For this user, and actually maybe this guy over here could be a developer and they have everything turned on. So we do this quite a lot in Toddle. Like every new feature, we tend to turn them all on for ourselves, so we can use them and work with them a little bit before they're released to everyone else. And we can actually do gradual releases. So, and again, in our case, we have what we call the Toddle heroes, which is our power users, the people who are using the platform the most and sort of the best people at supporting you on Discord, etc. Right? They're not employees, they're just users that are a central part of the community. And we almost always release things to them before it goes live to the general population, right? This allows them to get an early on view and also give us feedback before things comes out, right? And so this system lets us control exactly what features get deployed to which user without it impacting our general software deployment cycle, right? So let's go and take a look at what that looks like in reality, right? And in this case, I'm going to use Toddle as a way of showing it, but of course the general idea is the same no matter what you use, right? It doesn't even matter if you're using a visual development tool like Toddle or whether you're using whether you're coding, right? It's the same basic idea. So in this case, I've got my website, and on that website I have here a component I've called weather widget, and the weather widget just pulls weather data from my local area to show that, and I sort of have that on my website, right? And in this case, I want to make a change to the weather widget. I want to change the styling, right? And let's say, for the sake of argument, this is part of a new sort of complete rebrand where we change the styling of everything. So I actually don't want to release these changes right away. I want to sort of go and build the whole website with the new styling over time. And then when all that's ready, I want to release it to everyone. But I want to be able to see it, right? So we're going to use a feature flag to create a whole new theme, right? And so in this case, what I'm going to do here on the page is I'm just going to create, in this case, I'm just going to use a formula, right? And I'm going to call this flag : new UI, new theme, right? And so in this case, I can just say, well, if I just say false, right, it'll always be off. But what I actually probably want to do is, let's say, in this case, I want to use local storage. So there's many ways you can sort of decide you want to store these things. If you want users to be able to turn flags on and off for themselves, local storage is a pretty good idea. So get from local storage flags, what do we say, flag new theme, right? And so in this case, it's going to get, and we'll say Boolean, right? So what that's going to do is it's going to fetch a value from the local storage called flag new theme. And if it's there, it's going to be true. otherwise false, right? And so now I can take my widget, and instead of modifying this directly, I'm gonna right click and duplicate, and I'm gonna call it a new theme, right? So I basically just created a copy of my weather widget. I can now make whatever changes I want to do, right? We'll do something like this, maybe a bit lighter, and maybe our color here should actually match that a bit. Right, that'll be our new theme for this. And now I end up having this new copy of the component. And on my home page, I can then go here, and I want to add a widget, weather widget new theme. I'm going to put it right next to this. And then I'm just going to use a simple show hide logic here to say, well, if the flag new theme is not true, then show the old one. And then here I'm going to show hide and say, if the flag new theme is true, show the new one, right? Now in this case, let's go here and preview it. It's going to show the old one because I don't have that flag. If I go into my local storage here, right? There we go. And then we'll add one. What's a flag? New. True. Now if I reload again, it's going to use that, right? And of course you can then go and build like a feature flag page where you can turn all these flags on and off and automatically set your own local storage, right? So this approach sort of lets users do it on their own. That's sort of the simplest version. Maybe that's what you want. That's actually mostly how we do it in toddle. But we can also say, actually, we would prefer to control ourselves what features are sent to users, right? I want them to basically, like, I want to control who sees what, not having the end user doing it, right? So in this case, we're going to try something different, right? I'm going to go, and actually I'm going to use an API. So I want to, based on the logged in user session, I want to control what the user can see, right? So I've got a backend set here up in Sano. And it basically I'm just going to use the login. I don't really need to do anything more here, right? So what I'm going to do is I have a login page that I've sneakily built ahead of time. And I want to add, first I want to add Sano to my project. So I'm going to go and create a new service, pick Sano. And then here I'm going to copy the base URL to add it here, right? Done. Okay. And then I want to create a new authentication API or login API here based on the Sano schema. And with Sano, you have to send the email and password as part of the body. Toddle prefills this if you have it like specified in Sano. So all we need to do here is I have an email and password variable. Hook it up to them. If you want to know more about how to set out authentication in Toddle with, for example, Sano, we'll link to a video of that in the description as well to sort of go through how this whole process actually works. But for now, all you need to know is these variables are linked to the input fields so that they basically use them when you log in, right? Now on the form, whenever I click submit, I want to call my auth login. Let's quickly go and do that with Andreas at toddle.dev. And the username of password. And now that I've done that, I'll see it says, okay, it did this and it got me the auth token. And then what I want to do is say, well, on success, when you successfully got the token, you want to set a session cookie, the auth. It gets a really bit mad when you say we use things like password, so it's going to complain about that a bit. Normally, like, don't make your password, right? It's just for example. So here I'm going to get my auth token from my data and save that. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to go to URL. Yeah. And I'm going to do / right? So the login page, when you're done logging in and that's successful, it's going to redirect you back to the home page. Let's go and try that once. Andreas at toddle.dev. Password. Let's try logging in. And it's going to redirect me to a home page and again complain that I had a terrible choice of password. Okay. So now that we are signed in, what can we do with that thing? Now we're authenticated, so now I have a user profile and I can identify different users on my platform, right? So now we're going to go back to the home page and we're going to add a new API here that's just going to fetch my session. So it's going to say auth me, right? In this case, it's going to say invalid token because I need to refresh to get the cookie up and running. We'll try that again. And now we're actually getting like a user ID from the users table, created at timestamp, name, and email, right? So now we have a way of identifying users uniquely, right? So what I'm actually going to do in this flags new theme or formula, I'm not going to use local storage anymore. I'm going to, in this case, create an array of emails. So there's many ways you can do this, but in this case, I'm going to say I'm going to have this array, and if that includes the data email, then this flag is true, right? So let's go and try that. Now that we load this, we see we get the new version because my email was in the list of approved users for this feature flag, right? Where, of course, if I go and change it, I can say, let's remove this one from the list, right? Now, if I refresh it, I'm getting the old version, right? So that's one way you could do just a simple user check. But because we're in toddle here, right, and we're using the formula to define these flags, you can like do any logic you want. Like you could also do it the other way. You could say like if this string, the email, if that includes @toddle.dev, right? Well, that's in that case, okay, if it's a toddle dev email login, in this case, you should actually use a regular expression to make sure people can't just add like .my domain, right? But you get the basic idea, right? You can use any sort of logic here to verify whether your users are in the segment that should see the flag or not. Like you literally, maybe you have other data on your user profile you want to add in to define that. But you can use anything you want. And you can then, I can go and make any sort of changes I want to do on my new theme, really like whatever I'm interested in here, right? I can go and make that changes. And only people who have that flag enabled for them will actually need it. And so eventually I can then go and say, well, actually I want to add some more users to this, right? Like I think let's go and see, we'll go back to doing the array, right? Right. Includes. So we'll do this one, right? And maybe I want to say, well, actually, maybe Casper should take a look at this, right? So now we're 2 people enabled, right? So we can sort of roll it out. We can also slowly roll it out over time. Maybe on your user object, you actually tag like a cohort and saying like, maybe someone should be a beta tester, maybe they shouldn't. All this kind of logic. You can control exactly down to the detail who gets to see what when, right? You can even, if you really want to, you can even do like a random number, right? And then say bigger, larger, greater is what we called it, greater than 0.5, right? That basically says you'll do half and half if you want an A/B test. Like obviously you would need some analytics to make that actually work, right? But you can even do that kind of thing to sort of control how you're rolling this out, right? And one of the really, really great things about feature flags is that if it turns out that you at some point release something that's, actually doesn't quite work. Like it actually broke something. You released something by mistake and you want to roll that back. You can just do that, right? You can just turn the flag off. You don't need to go and roll back all the changes that happened in production since that thing was released, because maybe it actually takes a day or 2 before you realize. Maybe it's a smaller feature that wasn't used so much. Take some time before you realize it. You can roll back changes on a feature level instead of like undoing everything you've pushed, right? And then eventually you will have to go and clean up these feature flags when you know things are solid and you don't need to change. But until then, you have this fine-grained control, right? So this is a much, much better way of releasing software. It's a much, much better way of guaranteeing, or at least as close as you can, guaranteeing that you're delivering working software to your users. It's a much, much faster, efficient, and safer release process. So thank you very much for watching. I think for some people this might have been a slightly controversial take, but I promise you this is a very tried and tested idea. Some of the best software companies in the world operate this way. And as I said, I linked the report to the State of DevOps in the description. Go and read that. It's really insightful, and actually it's a good read. Thank you very much for watching, and if you are curious and interested in trying out Toddle, go and sign up today. It's free to get started. Make sure to join our Discord community, where there's a ton of really, really talented, very, very helpful builders that can sort of answer any questions you have, or like help you if you get stuck on anything, right? Have a great day.